New York, 1980s. Seemingly just another day in the office when a group of young, hot-blooded investment bankers decide to share their business cards. But these aren't just pieces of cardboard to these guys. Their business cards are a representation of their success, their pride, and their ego. A monument to their high-class status in life. Patrick Bateman shows his card with pride, but then when presented with his colleagues' cards, he starts to get nervous. It dawns on him that their seemingly white and featureless cards may be more sophisticated than his white and featureless card. Bateman then asks to see the card of his rival, Paul Allen. Upon viewing it, Bateman is plummeted into chaos. He looks still on the outside, but on the inside, he is erupting. This is just a glimpse into the twisted psychology of Patrick Bateman, a man who seemingly lives a double life. A successful businessman by day and a dangerous serial killer by night, who can't control his sadistic desires. Whether it's all real or just fantasies in his head, Patrick Bateman truly is a character who simply isn't there. So today we are going to explore the history of American Psycho, so maybe we can understand the truly bizarre and unpredictable character, Patrick Bateman. So, let's get ready to return some tapes as we check it out. An American Psycho is based on a book of the same name. It was published in 1991, written by American author Bret Easton Ellis. Ellis came up with the story due to personal issues he was going through at that time. He felt like he was slipping into a consumeristic void, and although going down a path that was promised to make him feel good and confident, it just made him feel worse. And wow! If you thought the movie was violent, then you ain't seen nothing yet, as the book was so over the top with how violent and disturbing it can be, it brought with it many controversies. The book definitely doesn't shy away from some grotesque depravity of the troubled main protagonist-antagonist Patrick Bateman. In fact, the book was deemed so messed up, several publishers didn't want to publish it. Yep, they thought the book was nasty and dirty and didn't want to get their hands filthy with it. At first, company Simon & Schuster were going to publish the book, but they backed out. And then Vintage Books got their hands on American Psycho and would publish it, but only after certain edits were made. But the book still managed to raise tensions. So much so, Ellis even received death threats, and the book would be banned in certain parts of the world. In fact, in the 90s, it was the United States' 53rd most banned book. Even feminist activists went after the book, which included Gloria Steinem, who, incidentally, is the stepmother to Christian Bale. Okay, I gotta admit, that one did blow my mind. Even here in Australia, in 2024, American Psycho is still considered so controversial and dangerous, it can't be sold at bookstores without being covered in shrink wrap, as you can see here from this copy of the book that I picked up from a local bookstore. Yeah, it's a federal crime to sell this book here without a coat of plastic sealing up all the horrors inside the book. Now, despite Ellis being told that the book would end his career, and the fact that a positive review of the book in the Los Angeles Times led to subscribers of that publication threatening to cancel their subscription to the newspaper for that review, American Psycho was still successful, and actually would go on to get praised. It was seen as a milestone in literature, thanks to its quote, transgressive and postmodern qualities. Apart from some of the excessive violence, there were several interesting scenes that were in the book but didn't feature in the movie. For example, in the book, it's explained that Bateman lives in the same apartment building as Tom Cruise, and that Bateman met Cruise in the apartment's elevator, to which Bateman is completely starstruck and can't remember the name of Cruise's latest movie at that time, that movie of course being Cocktail. In the book, Bateman has a hallucination where he gets attacked by an anamorphic park bench, in which, like some kind of transformer, the bench comes alive to punish Bateman for his sins, showing just how much Bateman's mental health has deteriorated. In the book, it's learned that Bateman is obsessed with Rolex watches and frequently shops for the latest model of Rolex. However, the Rolex brand did not want to be associated with American Psycho when it was made into a movie, so that's why that subplot was cut out. There was also a character who was in the book but not the film, Patrick's ex-girlfriend Bethany, who he takes out on a really awkward date, but ultimately kills her back at his apartment with a nail gun. As well as another scene where Patrick kills a young boy at the zoo, and the book goes into greater details of Bateman's cannibalism. Yep, indeed, it'll take a strong stomach to be able to take on the American Psycho book. And it is, without a doubt, one of the most controversial books I've ever spoken about in my career of making YouTube videos. Like, this book is really far out there, man! Author Bret Easton Ellis never anticipated that American Psycho would be adapted into a movie, feeling himself that his story was unfilmable. However, there are claims that it was written to be unfilmable, due to Ellis not liking prior movie adaptation based on one of his novels, Less Than Zero, which came out in 1987. However, in 1992, just 1 year after the publication of American Psycho, there already was plans to adapt the story onto the big screen, after The Crow and Street Fighter producer Edward R. Pressman bought the rights. Oh, and he already had a history of showing the horrors of the high-flying yuppie culture of that era, having previously produced Wall Street. In fact, according to Ellis, Pressman was obsessed with making American Psycho into a feature film. Apparently, in those early days, Johnny Depp was keen to star in the movie, and as the production went forward, David Cronenberg was hired as director, and Brad Pitt was to star as Patrick Bateman, with Ellis himself writing the movie's screenplay. However, Cronenberg and Ellis really weren't seeing eye to eye, as Cronenberg wanted to tone down the violence and not feature the restaurant and nightclub scenes as he found them boring. According to Wikipedia, Ellis ignored Cronenberg's requests and just wrote the script as he saw fit. But after a while, he became so bored and disillusioned with the process. At one stage, he ended the movie with a musical sequence on top of the World Trade Center, featuring the Barry Manilow song, Daybreak. Naturally, Cronenberg wasn't happy with the script, so he hired scriptwriter Norman Snyder to pen a new script. But Cronenberg didn't like that script either. So I guess at that stage, Cronenberg had had enough and was gone from the production. It's here we get to Canadian filmmaker Mary Harron. In 1996, her movie I Shot Andy Warhol was premiered at Cannes. At that stage, American Psycho's production had been stuck in development hell for about 5 years, and upon the release of I Shot Andy Warhol, Harron was asked by the higher-ups of American Psycho's production if she would be interested in directing, where she was then sent a copy of the book, and upon reading it, her answer was no. This was way too violent, but she was intrigued by the 1980s satire and aspect of the story, and felt that enough time had passed to make an American Psycho a retro period piece movie that'll be a commentary on 1980s excesses. And so that got her involved with American Psycho, providing that she could also redo the script. She would also team up with actress and scriptwriter Guinevere Turner to help write a new script. And yes, although everyone loves the 80s now, and in the last 20 odd years, there have been tons of movies set in the 80s which honour and homage the decade, where in these movies, everything looks like it's an over-exaggerated version of the 80s, like the 80s on steroids. This fascination had started round about that time in the late 90s, before the decade of the 80s was even 10 years old. Heck, round about this time, The Wedding Singer also came out, another period piece celebrating the 80s. I guess the point is American Psycho represents a time when we were now collectively starting to get interested and fascinated at nostalgic looks back into the 80s. However, what sets American Psycho apart from all the other movies is, despite all these other movies having this message of, weren't the 80s great? Weren't things so much better back then? American Psycho actually showed a darker light on that decade. So isn't it interesting that one of the first retrofitting movies that homages the 80s wasn't just kissing that decade's butt, but actually showing it to be not such a good time? So with American Psycho's production forming, there was still one vital component, that being who could play the complex and truly despicable Patrick Bateman. At this stage, Brad Pitt had long left the production. Almost famous actor and future Dr. Manhattan ding-a-ling flasher, Billy Crudup was cast in the role. But he found the source material too disturbing and just couldn't connect with the character of Patrick Bateman, so he left the production. At that time, Welsh actor Christian Bale was filming the movie Velvet Goldmine in the UK, where he was contacted about the part of Patrick Bateman by director Mary Harron, but he never heard of the book. Never read it, didn't know anything about it, so he turned it down. Harron then contacted Velvet Goldmine's producer, Christine Vachon, and asked her to ask Bale to at least look at the script. So he did, and Bale loved it, and flew to New York for an audition, and Harron knew that he was the man for the job. It seems that both Bale and Harron knew exactly what the movie was and where to take it, with both of their points of view completely being in sync, with Bale describing Bateman as, quote, an alien who has landed in the unabashedly capitalistic New York City of the 1980s. Now, Bale's difficulties of putting on an American accent and the fact that at that stage he was still a relatively unknown were factors, but both Harron and Ellis just knew that he was the on-screen Patrick Bateman. So plans were moving forward, with things clear ahead. That is until Lionsgate Films bought American Psycho's production and thought that Bale was just too much of an unknown actor. They wanted someone bankable, someone who's in the mainstream, who would guarantee box office success, and so, just like that, Bale was let go. Instead, Lionsgate turned to Leonardo DiCaprio, who at that time was riding high off the huge success of Titanic. Despite being one of the biggest names of the moment, director Mary Harron was strongly against this, feeling DiCaprio was too much of a pretty boy heartthrob. Harron supposedly wouldn't even meet up with DiCaprio to discuss the movie. So there was clearly a problem here, and Lionsgate stuck with DiCaprio and fired Harron. Oliver Stone was then hired as director. Jared Leto was also cast in the movie, as well as Cameron Diaz, who, as we all know, would not go on to feature in the finished film. Stone and DiCaprio were moving further and further away from Harron's commentary and satire of the 1980s, with American Psycho now being more like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde psychological drama. Almost as if they just didn't have the stomach for how grotesque and evil Bateman is, and trying to somehow humanize the character and give him more rhyme and reason. In other words, the Hollywood treatment. However, Leonardo DiCaprio then left American Psycho's production to star in the Danny Boyle-directed thriller The Beach instead. And so with that, Oliver Stone also left the production, where Harron was rehired as director. Great! So now the production can go back to Bale, right? Well, no, as Lionsgate then turned to Ewan McGregor. Yep, if you can't get the Titanic guy, then you may as well try to get the Star Wars guy. And so he was cast. But word on the street has it that Bale contacted McGregor and really pleaded with him to turn it down, as Bale still really had his eye on the part. And so, rather kindly, McGregor did just that. He left the production for Bale. But Lionsgate still weren't budging. They were determined to get a big Hollywood name in the part. They asked Vince Vaughn, he said no. Edward Norton, he said no. Ben Affleck, he said no. Matt Damon, he said no. Till Lionsgate were probably like, fine, no one wants this part, we may as well give it to that Christian Bale guy. Tuh. And so finally, after many delays and setbacks, Christian Bale was finally Patrick Bateman. American Psycho was given a small budget of $7 million, with most of the filming taking place in Toronto, Canada, despite being set in New York City, with the shoot lasting 7 weeks. However, news of the movie's shoot led to protests at the Toronto City Hall by protesters who wanted American Psycho's shoot to be banned because it came to light that a murderer called Paul Bernardo, who committed many terrible crimes in Toronto, owned a copy of the American Psycho book. Because of this, the production struggled to find locations. For example, Bateman's office was to be filmed in a real office, but the owners of that office backed out. So the office had to be recreated on a soundstage. Of course, other actors joined the production, including Willem Dafoe as private investigator Donald Kimball, who is investigating Bateman after the disappearance/murder of Paul Allen. When filming his scenes, 3 different takes of him talking to the Patrick Bateman character was filmed. One take where he talks to Bateman as if he feels that he is innocent. Another take where it comes across that he is a bit more suspicious of Bateman. And a third take where he talks to Bateman like he knows he killed Paul Allen. With each of these takes being edited together, creating a truly unnerving and memorably disjointed part of the movie. Like, you don't know what's going on in these scenes. Jared Leto, who had previously been cast in the movie, was still on board as Paul Allen, Bateman's rival. Another memorable scene is when Bateman suddenly and brutally kills Allen. Now, Leto didn't know that Bale was going to run at him with an axe, so when that scene was filmed, Leto's reactions were real. Finally, Bale and Harron really wanted Winona Ryder to play Bateman's girlfriend, Evelyn, but she turned it down and the part went to Reese Witherspoon, who at that time was a rising actress, particularly with the teen audience. When it came to how to play the part of Bateman, Bale took inspiration from Tom Cruise himself. Bale saw Bateman as being like an alien, a Martian trying to fit in, but in doing so, this alien appears off and quite bizarre. One night, Bale saw Cruise on the David Letterman show, and just felt there was something really weird and off about him. He was full of high energy and intense friendliness, while, according to Bale, at the same time, having nothing behind his eyes. And I'm guessing that, to Bale, with these blank eyes, it's as if Cruise's over-the-top enthusiasm and friendliness was a performance. A quirk of trying to appear as something, while also being really intense. And so, this is how we got Bale's take on the character, and it's all thanks to the weird mannerisms of Tom Cruise. And of course, during the shoot, Bale took the method acting approach and constantly stayed in character as Bateman, even when the cameras weren't rolling, which is pretty scary when you think about it. I mean, Bateman is awful. Needless to say, during the shoot, he didn't really talk to any of the cast and crew, and so I'm guessing not really making many friends either. And he never spoke without his Patrick Bateman voice. Hey, I guess this guy went all out for his craft. American Psycho had its mainstream release in April 2000. It was originally hit with an NC-17 rating, but after 18 seconds were trimmed, it did make its way to an R rating. American Psycho would go on to make just over $34 million on its $7 million budget, so it was profitable. And despite some critics and audience members being shocked and disgusted with the movie's violent nature, it was still widely praised and seen as a humorous, surreal, and violent satire of late 1980s indulgence greed culture. As well, of course, Christian Bale's performance also being praised. Now granted, some critics were skeptical of the film, with some finding it lifeless and lacking, but, generally it was positively praised. So what happens when the credits roll? What does life have in store for Patrick Bateman after he tells us about his pain, with so much ambiguity hanging over what may or may not have happened? Well, interestingly, as a promotional campaign for American Psycho, fans could subscribe to a series of emails from Bateman himself to his therapist, where in the emails we learn that he married his secretary, Jean, and had a son called Patrick Jr., who he actually does idolize. But we also learn that Bateman is now in the process of a divorce. Needless to say, I don't think this information is canon, and Bale himself hated these series of emails. I guess he felt that it cheapened his character, taking away the movie's intelligent satire. He felt the campaign reduced American Psycho to just being a slasher pick, or something like American Pie, and that the character in the movie should stand on its own merits, and not these weird comical emails from Bateman. 2 years later, in 2002, there was a widely loathed sequel called American Psycho 2, which starts with Patrick Bateman getting killed, played by a stunt double stand-in, taking away any and all ambiguity of the previous movie, where we now focus on a new character called Rachel Newman, played by Mila Kunis, a direct-to-video sequel, now set on a college campus, giving it more of a teen movie vibe. Oh, and of course, William Shatner. And yes, once again, this is a sequel that is genuinely hated by everyone, including American Psycho's author, Bret Easton Ellis, who denounced this movie. Yeah, I think this has become one of those sequels where people just say, yeah, no, that didn't happen, and decanonize it. But to be fair, in reality, American Psycho 2 isn't actually a sequel. Originally, when its production started, it was its own film, called The Girl Who Wouldn't Die, until someone in the production had the mind-numbing idea of turning it into American Psycho 2, with tweaks and changes being made in order to connect it to the first American Psycho movie. And it just doesn't work. Someone behind the scenes should have known that this would surely piss off the fans of the first American Psycho, but it happened. Then in 2013, there was an American Psycho stage show, which originally featured former Doctor Who Matt Smith as Patrick Bateman, and from the pictures, he actually does look quite intimidating. It opened up in London to mixed to positive reviews, with its last stint thus far being in Chicago 2023. Now, I've never seen the stage show, but from pictures that I have seen, it does look pretty far out there. In 2013, Huey Lewis, who gets brought up in American Psycho, starred in a parody sketch for Funny or Die with Weird Al, where it's set up just like the scene in American Psycho when Patrick Bateman kills Paul Allen, only in the sketch, it's Lewis killing, well, Weird Al. I don't know why that is so funny, but it just is. Now, at one stage, it was announced that there would be an American Psycho TV show, which would act as a sequel to the movie, focusing on a 50-year-old Bateman, who is now training his apprentice to be just like him. But yeah, this does sound interesting and all, but I do think that the minute there is a sequel, that'll take the ambiguity away from the first movie, which in my opinion is one of the strengths of that movie. American Psycho has gone on to be considered a classic of its time, a cult movie that shocks, while still has something to say. I think the appeal is the character Patrick Bateman, who is very intriguing. Earlier in the movie, he declares that he just wants to fit in. He wants to go to the high-class restaurants and wear the upmarket clothes and listen to his Walkman, basically following all the rules and instructions that consumerism has given him, but it's not working. Look at him here walking to his office while listening to the song Walking on Sunshine on his Walkman. He has to be the most miserable looking person to ever listen to the song Walking on Sunshine. Keep in mind, while in a high-rise building, literally walking on sunshine. Once again, trying to follow the instructions of his lifestyle that have been provided, but once again, it's just not working, as Bateman fails to emote any of that song's happiness or optimism. With him following trends and pop culture and knowing about them, but more out of instructions rather than love, with his knowledge of Phil Collins and Huey Lewis and the News being more like an OCD encyclopedia than an actual fan. In fact, Bateman is surrounded by signs and advertisement messages telling him how to feel, promising him happiness, but it just doesn't work, despite the fact that he tries. So much so that when his delusions take over and he thinks that an ATM machine is telling him to feed him a cat, he actually considers it. Bateman is pretty much living a cursed life in the material world, unable to enjoy the spoils promised by that world. Or as he puts it, quote, "I'm simply not there." The truth is, Patrick Bateman can't control his lustful delusions and desires of sadistic violence, with his own disillusionment of reality and fantasy leaving him, frankly, quite a sad and pathetic character. Despite the power and status he appears to yield, it's really as simple as that, and seemingly, Bateman isn't really all that complex. In his own eyes, he has no humanity, but in being so, by nature, this actually makes him complex. because he does so many bad things, whether real or otherwise, making Patrick Bateman a paradoxical character. He is always going to be searching for that resolution in order to find peace, but no matter how hard he tries, he won't find that resolution, but instead will sit and ponder in his own pain and disillusionment. Just as with all the other instructions within his environment, he is taunted and teased by a sign that says, "This is not an exit." I'll wrap up this character analysis with a line from Dante's Inferno, of which this very line was also featured at the start of the American Psycho novel. That being, "Abandon all hope, ye who enters here." So from this line, I guess that we can see that Patrick Bateman is literally stuck in his own hell. When you think about it, Patrick Bateman has gone on to become one of the most interesting, but also completely unlikable characters in movie history. I mean, this isn't Darth Vader. There's not going to be any kind of redemption story or arc to be found around here. Nope! Bateman is totally gone and lost. Anyway, I'm Minty. And I'm off to return some tapes. See ya!